I am the glottologist Salvatore Dedola. In this lecture, I am presenting the birth and development of Gothic language. Gothic language was born neither more nor less at the same time as the other European languages. I have an obligation to present a clear context, without ambiguity, in order to dissolve a deceptive plot, which proposes a fable of dependence and affiliation between languages, a narrative within which, for 2 centuries, inter-European relations are proposed. Instead, we need to change perspective and think of European languages in terms of an original contemporaneity. We need to be clear right away. Gothic language, together with all the other Euro-Mediterranean languages, is a rib of the original language which was spoken in Nile's Delta by Homo sapiens before he began his expansion. I invite you to read my etymological dictionary of Gothic language. I invite you to read its methodological preface to understand the question well. From this comes a scientific testimony Gothic language was not born 6,000 years ago, as unfortunately many people say, but its roots go back hundreds of thousands of years. Let it be clear, in this dictionary, roots are testified with a rigorous method. Put another way, Gothic language keeps its roots in Nilotic language, or Egyptian language. We can serenely say that Egyptian language appeared in Mediterranean Sea as the language expressly forged by Homo sapiens, the language he spoke over thousands of years, as he descended along Nile from Ethiopian highlands. Its intuitive human race had the opportunity to organize himself into society, and therefore to evolve his own language, only in areas rich in water, rich in light, on fertile lands, capable of producing many plants and many animals. Primitive nucleus of Gothic language therefore arose in Nile Delta. Progressive distinction of the various languages present in Europe today is a result of an unraveling of kinship due to a mutual loss of contact between clans, tribes, peoples who originally lived in fraternity. Its intuitive tribes of sapiens became more and more numerous over time. We can easily describe a primitive human expansion from Delta colonizing North Africa up to the Pillars of Hercules, easily passing into Iberia thanks to wineskins full of hay tied together. Then Homo spread to France, Italy, Corsica, Sardinia. However, various tribes choose to detach themselves from Delta, going to the opposite, to Canaan, crossing Turkey, passing Dardanelles and settling permanently in Romania. Only in this way can we understand the phenomenon of 2 identical original strains, Western European strain, Eastern European strain, linguistic strains currently classified without reason as Neo-Latin languages, that is, as languages flourished after Roman colonization, while instead my narration helps to understand the archaic umbilical cord of a unitary primitive Nilotic descent. Many people are convinced Spanish, French, Italian, Sardinian, Romanian languages originated from Rome. But it's not true. On the opposite, we stand within the truth. The strange Latinization of these languages is an archaic phenomenon. Indeed, Rome itself received this Mediterranean language for the last time, from 753 centuries BC, as we learn from archaic Sardinian language, as we learn from the strange crowding of peoples within primitive Roman walls. If people insists on cataloging the 5 languages mentioned as Neo-Latin, then we would be entitled to think also Latin language is Neo-Latin too. Excuse the pan. But it's better to remain silent on this diatribe, since now it's not productive going to plant a banner of reason on the unfortunated ideologies on which Romance philologists feed. Let's continue the story. Another branch of sapiens, beyond Canaan, reached Mesopotamia, and thanks to the two rivers, as well as the various tributaries, became sedentary. Historically, we know them with the name of Sumerians, which means city dwellers. Other tribes leaving Nile Delta had also dispersed in Arabia, others in Turkey, others in Greece and Illyria, others on the immense plains of Ukraine. We historically know pre-Ukrainians as Sumerians and after as Scythians. Another tribe of sapiens had reached Vistula River and followed it to Baltic Sea, and then ferried. This lineage was the same that after several millennia would return from Gotland Island to Vistula River, then going up its course and permanently entering Byzantine borders. These are precisely Goths people, of which today I intend to speak. However, already from now we can note a millenary unity among Germanic languages, and we sense there was a much longer contiguity among them, which could have lasted even 10,000 years. This map also indicates Celtic territories occupied by Germanic tribes in historical times. But I cannot dissipate myself in explanations. I have to go on. This picture, illustrated so far, overturns the idea Gothic language first sprang from icy north. My reversal is entirely logical and aligns with the cultural fabric methodically woven by anthropologists and climatologists. In fact, Neanderthal and sapiens never emerged from Arctic ices during the Ice Age, but came from Ethiopian highlands. And I repeat, the first language appeared in Mediterranean Sea and in Europe, belonged to Ethiopian clans who flocked to Delta and then expanded through many vir sacra, that is, through many sacred detachments. Some scholars still believe in the glacial origin, or Germanic origin, or Glacio-Germanic origin, and classify the first European language as Indo-Germanic, or, according to hypocritical fashion of politically correct, as Indo-European. I'm not going to linger in outlining the compromise existing between Indo-Germanic and Indo-European definitions. If some Germanist would like to explain it without preconceptions, he would be welcome. However, here I'm wanting to establish the truth and explain the concept of Indo-Germanic, or Indo-European, is only ideological. Unfortunately, from the outset, this concept enveloped, in spite of themselves, the studies of very serious people who applied themselves to the comparison of languages based on the little evidences available up to 200 years ago. Those glottologists had been trapped, in spite of themselves, by the strong nationalist demands of those times. In those times, German nation was born, and it was necessary to feed it with many myths in order for it to grow. No scandal. Every nation needs the glue of myths, not just Germans. One of Aryan myths Germans wanted to register to themselves was the Hyperborean fable, born out of an ancient paronomasia. That is, due to an evident linguistic mess made by Greeks already 3,000 years ago, having lost ties with the past for centuries, especially after Trojan War. They thought Hyperborean were a people who lived beyond the north wind. So, without thinking, Hyperborean were placed into the pole, and so were mentioned in Homeric hymn 7 by Pindar, Virgil, Horace, Pausanias, Strabo, Pliny, Pomponius Mela, Apollonius Rhodius. Linguistic science did not exist in those days, and no learned man ever wanted to reflect on the nonsense he handed down. And he was never intrigued by an opposing Delphic legend according to which god Apollo, that is the sun god, spent the winter months, that is cold months, at the Hyperborean. No scholar had noticed this incoherent popular fable had matured due to a response from Delphi's oracle, packaged to explain didactically to sailors, and even to astronomers, the seasonal courses and recurrences of sun, according to which the sun in winter goes south, goes to visit Hyperborean. It was south those scholars should have been looking, not north. Those scholars did not even need an affirmation of historian Herodotus, later followed by Callimachus, a wise Alexandrian poet, according to which Hyperborean in the distant past brought grain to Delos' sanctuary. In the center of Aegean Sea, they brought wheat to Apollo, to sun god, because wheat is the most powerful nourishment given by sun. Wheat is not born at the pole. It does not take much precision to understand Hyperborean is a phonetic arrangement from Egyptian per beur. Analyzing these syllables we have per, mouth of a river, plus beur, sight of greatness, majesty, wealth, prosperity. Per beur originally meant the delta, the Nile mouth, the site of wealth. And we know that before metallurgy, wealth was expressed in grain. Hyperborean's fable was born in the Delta at the beginning of Neolithic era. A myth related to Hyperborean is Thule, which is Iceland. The first explorer, Pytheas of Massalia in 330 BC, speaks of Thule as a land of fire and ice in which sun never sets, and geographically it's about 6 days of navigation from present-day Great Britain. This is a photograph of Iceland. Tacitus, in De Vita Aeli Agricolae, writes Roman fleet circumnavigated Britain and reached Orkney, reaching Thule in sight, but it gave up landing due to bad season imminence. Virgil, in Prima Georgica 30, writes, Tibi serviet ultima Thule, that is, let even extreme Thule be at your service. This was a tribute to Octavian. Thule derives from Etruscan tuler, border, in turn from Egyptian tur, reject, remove from, plus r, from. So, tur is a repelling boundary. This is a nomen omen. Then, Thule was forgotten in its entity, despite having been settled by Vikings. But among Germans it remained as a myth and became a geographical notion of occultist groups. Example, the Thule Society, Thule Gesellschaft, founded on August 18, 1918, identified Thule as the origin of Aryan race wisdom, land of blonde giants having blue eyes, fierce skin, who dominated the world, but lost their dominion for laying with inferior races. The myth of Aryan race identified Thule men with Hyperborean. This is how fantasies became cultural categories with the Nazis. It should be an obligation of science to reveal false myths. Instead, academies have even mounted theories on them, which are rigorously woven on Germanic languages, as well as on Latin, Greek, ancient Iranian, ancient Indian. Basket affected by those theories, the so-called Indo-Germanic Ursprache, barely reaches 15 languages compared to the hundreds of languages spoken in this immense territories 2,000–3,000 years ago, since time immemorial. Among languages selected by Indo-Germanists, many languages spoken 2,000–3,000 years ago are missing, such as Sardinian, Corsican, 32 languages of Augustan Italy, Sicilian language, Oscan language, numerous Celtic dialects scattered in France, Spain, Ireland, in British Isles, scattered in pre- and post-Geronimus Dalmatic speeches. In addition to this incredible deficiency, all Semitic languages of pre-Augustan times are missing. Finally, Sumerian language is missing, Egyptian too. I do not intend to put the Andronovo culture, flourished in Central Asia from 15th to 13th century BC, studied by Elena Kuzmina, the origin of Indo-Iranians. This scholar poses a serious mortgage, opening us to a novelty that Indo-European language would have been born among Andronovo tribes. But discussing it here, now, would mean weighing down a picture which, if possible, should be streamlined. Etymology. At this point, I think no one can accept an original language traced only through Germanic languages among a little basket, in toto, 10%. Even accepting an extension to Andronovo tribes, this picture does not expand much. And in any case, academies remain immovable. Out of that moving 10%, they made a square, and they even invented the comparative practice, a procedure that compares only the languages of their own basket, or it compares single words taken from this basket. And they call this comparison etymological practice. But we, and they, know the true definition of etymology, which indicates an excavation in past times, carried out in order to find an archaic progenitor of the word we are examining. The excavation itself becomes a sort of coring, and we cannot stop a coring until we have found the word of origins. False etymology. Their comparative practice does not allow for coring but only allows horizontal comparisons of more or less contemporary words. Whatever happens to them, their comparisons always stop at the Latin stratum, or, which is the same, at the Greek stratum. Those scholars, not doing coring and therefore not being able to indicate a true origin, invent it. I repeat, they invent it. That is, they put an asterisk in it and match the invented word to the asterisk. Example: blood, Indo-European, blow. See Introduction to English and German Etymologies, 117. Or door, Indo-European, draw. See Mistrelli, Gothic Grammar 96. True etymology. Now observe the true etymology of blood and door. Note now the false etymology for gates. Now look at the genuine etymology of gates. All this happens because Indo-Europeanists, or Germanists, do not want to become aware that their touching 15 languages are not enough to connote the language of origins. To trace its connotations, the many languages I have mentioned are needed. In short, if, in addition to his comparison, a researcher really wants to find the origins, he must open dictionaries and grammars of all languages that appeared in Mediterranean Sea before Augustus. Only those dictionaries, compared with each other, allow for a healthy and profitable coring. In addition to my etymological dictionary of Sardinian language and the corresponding historical grammar of Sardinian language, a researcher must also open many dictionaries and grammars of Semitic languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, Phoenician, Ugaritic, Assyrian, Babylonian, Akkadian. In addition to these dictionaries and grammars, they must know Sumerian and Egyptian languages. True etymologies cannot be bought on the market, nor can they hang them from clouds. A researcher can derive them if he has studied Greek and Latin well as languages they insist on calling Indo-European. This is not enough, because it's necessary to deepen one's erudition on grammars and dictionaries of Semitic languages, and moreover on Sumerian and Egyptian ones. Yet all this is still not enough when researcher lacks the gift of intuition and interpretation. In short, etymological research is not a tourist journey among the ruins of Rome and Athens, nor is it a pleasure trip. Instead, it's a severe, careful, and rigorous pilgrimage among numerous ancient finds, not only linguistic ones, which must be interpreted and compared with sharp discipline, where the component of doubt cannot be an obstacle but rather a goad in arranging a coherent and enlightening frame. Schematically, I say that in order to operate an etymology well, a triangle technique is applied, placing at the two base angles a word comparison. They must be homophones or of a same homophonic class, and placing a common semanteme at the top. For example, it's useless to compare Italian foro, whole, with Italian foro, place where justice is exercised. At the triangle top, there is no common meaning. Let's now see the false etymology of Italian ciao, hello, the one proposed by Romance philologists, who nebulously dwell on words they are misunderstanding. Now let's see the true etymology of ciao, which, as can be seen, has a very clear Egyptian foundation. Let's now see the false etymology of Italian anchor, for which the Dizionario Etymologico della Lingua Italiana glides straight on Latin, ancora, basing it on an ideology according to which Italian language must necessarily derive from Latin, and they comfort ancora with a contemporary Greek word. This is the first mistake. But here's the second mistake. Etymological basis is fixed in Greek ankos, curvature, and this only because ankos resembles ancora in sound, but not in meaning. Now let's look at the real anchor triangle, which has very clear Egyptian basis. Monosyllables. Further on, we surprised Mastrelli producing the false etymology of Gottish gates, goat, which he says coming from Indo-European G80s. He was wrong twice, the first because he invented that word, the second because he proposes two syllables for an original word, falling into an unforgivable foul. In fact, Mastrelli, And all Indo-Europeanists got one thing right, writing in their books that language was born everywhere in a form of monosyllables. In this, I agree, also because the question is intuitive. It's no coincidence Egyptian and Sumerian, the most remote languages of humanity, are written in monosyllables, and where they have disyllables, they are divisible into syllables, each syllable with its own meaning. Its obvious lexical patrimony appeared in history with Egyptians and Sumerians, is the same patrimony elaborated by Neanderthals and sapiens, a vocabulary dictionary unchanged for hundreds of centuries, enriched and never worn out thanks to a religious custody exercised by successive generations on the Delta. A single vowel or a single consonant. This is how the first words were expressed. Hence we have a in Sumerian, a water, in Egyptian, a go, and in Egyptian, a old man. We have in opposition, e, in Sumerian, e, talking. Likewise is opposed, I, Sumerian, I, dress, Egyptian, I, an exclamation, you, was also opposed. Example, Sumerian, you, earth. As for consonants, in Sumerian I propose the following words: va, knife, be, measure, by, adverbial particle, bu, perfection, ab, cow, ebb, oval shape, ib, get angry, cave. In Egyptian we have ba, soul, by, wonder, bu, house, and so on for each letter of the alphabet and for each twinning of consonant plus vowel. By these simple monosyllables, each language produced 300 to 400 words. Those are the first words of humanity, and they were enough to go out into the world to mature a complex vocabulary, measuring oneself against nature, with thought, with law, with religion. Even today, we, superbly modern citizens, need only 300 words to live in society, in addition to a few dozen words peculiar to each profession. This is how language was born. Remaining words are all consequences. For example, Latin verb, ago, I do, I act. Greek, ago, was already monosyllable in Sumerian, ag, to make. Egyptian, act, thing, deal, affair, from which Latin, actum, act, action. Italian, asso, a face of playing cards, based on Sumerian, as one. Hittite, as one. English, cut, has an etymological basis in Sumerian, kud, to cut, and so on for thousands of monosyllables. If we look closely, monosyllables of ancient Orient do not total more than a few thousand. It's useless to fiddle around. Those few thousand voices still form the basis of all European languages. Polysyllables. Over the centuries, however, polysyllables also arose. They begin to appear in Akkadian language, which thus seems to have a more modern patina, closer to us. But Beware, it's we today who perceive Akkadian words as polysyllables. In reality, they are composed by the same Egyptian and Sumerian monosyllables, which now appear agglutinated together in a new writing, and perhaps modified by sandhi, genitive chain, or by metathesis, or by metaphonesis in assimilation processes, with the only effect of sewing together ancient words, concepts. Almost nothing has changed compared to the ancient grammar in which each syllable, once agglutinated, received its syntactic function according to its position in the spoken chain. See the Sumerian grammar in this regard. Akkadian polysyllables were born precisely with this function. That is, they were born as syntagms, as links of words that were forming the plinths of syntactic organization. Today, those Akkadian polysyllables, and even the current polysyllables, are perceived only as ankylosed expression devoid of syntactic value. For example, the Latin trisyllable aurora is perceived as a single mental image, a purple light associated with sunrise. Instead, its Egyptian origins highlight the mental process that was necessary to compose this trisyllable. 3 phonosemantemes were employed: aur, to conceive, to be pregnant, plus great god, plus Ra, sun god. Trisyllable aur meant she who gives birth to the great god Ra. In it we perceive, synthetically but distinctly, 1. The image of the pregnant goddess who gives birth every day in front of the amazed spectator. 2. The image of the glorious immensity of childbirth. 3. The image of sun as the face of supreme God. Greek: beginning, origin, first cause, comes from Akkadian Arhu, moon, moon goddess, first day of the month, lunation beginning. Etymological basis is Egyptian ar, create, generate, plus day, time, season. This compound originally meant she who generates the time. In fact, it is with the moon, with moon quarters, that ancients marked the time. It's no coincidence that primitive man and all Semites have always counted in base 4 on a sexagesimal basis, admonished by the course of the moon. Daedalus was a mythical personage in whom Greeks personified the first developer of architectural art. Then he escaped from Labyrinthus flying with wings of feathers and wax. His name is based in Sumerian Dedalu, the flying builder, form, build, plus dal, fly, plus he. Sirena in Greek mythology is a sea monster, half woman, half fish, whose song fascinates sailors. Base in Sumerian, sing, plus n, fascination, work of magic. Gothic language originality. All foregoing speech has served to introduce the reader to my etymological dictionary of Gothic language, making him understand in a few words what are the principles of methodology that have guided me. Gothic language is beautiful. Goth's people had the pride of managing his own Genius Linguae in total autonomy. They created a great language because they felt to be a great people, sovereign even when they dwelt within the borders of Byzantium. There are thousands of exclusively Gothic words, never earned by other languages. Goths were also poets. Who, if not a Goth, would have called the snow rain of wool? Woleries, read Woleris. Aware of doing base 4 calculations, who, if not they, would have called the number 8 as the two hands. That's 4 plus 4. Even mixed with Byzantine regime, whoever, if not they, would have refused to accept Greek Angelos Nuncio, which had already pervaded all Europe. They rejected it and, mindful of the ancient roots, forged eris from Egyptian Ari to visit. Goth's Genius Linguae was always vigilant, proudly vigilant, and they could afford to refuse Latin, liber, book, and also Greek, biblos, because the ancestral memory had not disappeared, and Wulfila wrote his Bible calling it Boka, from which German book, whose etymological basis is Egyptian be, to cut, hack, carve, hew stone. The book was originally nothing more than the activity of Egyptian stonecutter, and then, by extension, that of scribe, two artists who left written memories to posterity. Go to Egypt to see the carved and excavated inscriptions. Go to Egyptian Museum in Turin. That's what book means. Here's the value of archaic origins. A people defends the pride of belonging, and das Eins, death, state of death, was shared only by English death, while its etymological basis remained the Egyptian Tuati, the most archaic name of hell, a very ancient name for the land of the dead, Tuati, death, Tu, abysses, empty places. One of 1,000 original concepts Goths refused to share with Latins and Greeks is the concept of virgin, expressed by Maga SS. It later resurfaced in German, Mädchen, girl, but it sinks into Sumerian, Matab, woman, in heat age. We discover a fresh and primitive personality also in Maui, child, a vocative in Luca 8:54, Puella, surge. Maui is based in Egyptian Maui, cat. This is an onomatopoeia from cats, meow, considering that cats were sacred for Egyptians, and this evangelical episode concerns the resurrection of a little girl. It even seems obvious that Wulfila wrote, kitten, get up, Maui, rees, uris, instead of Greek, he pays, agirou, little girl, wake up. Notice now the poetic concept of Italian ruga, wrinkle, expressed by Gothic mili, from Egyptian murti, village lane. I always remember that Egyptians rendered L with R. Equal poetry we have in Sparwa, sparrow. It meant shepherd of canals, from Sumerian par, irrigation ditch, plus shepherd. Of course, sparrow prefers to live along insect-filled canals. Without an Egyptian base, none of us would have ever translated English sport, which derives from Gothic spords, stadium, racetrack, in turn rooted in Egyptian, perti, battlefield, vigor, strength, attack, with Egyptian exaltation particle, s, then s per t. It's difficult to find a more pertinent and primitive concept than Gothic, Tungo, language, English, tongue, from Egyptian, ta'ank, to keep alive. We can translate the primordial meaning as that which expresses life. Indeed, the moving distinguishes a living from a dead. We have a similar concept in Gothic, enku, give thanks, from Egyptian, ta, to give, plus anku, the living, that is, the beatified in heaven, epithet of Isis. The compound tianku meant to give thanks, to wish good health. Goths expressed even paradise by an original word, putting away Avestic pyridaisa and Greek paradaisos, instead saying wags, whose etymological basis is Egyptian, serpent, or serpent god, also a kind of well or spring in the great oasis, plus ankh, life, ever-living, wood of life, eternal, life, tree of life. We translate WAGGS as garden of eternal life. In alternative, we can translate it as garden of the god serpent. Look at the incredible value of Wulfila's translation. In conclusion, the Etymological Dictionary of Gothic Language, a work of mine, not only gives the etymology of the entire list of Wulfilian words, but reveals a safe and innovative technique, the only truly correct way of translating an archaic word, returning to it the fullness of the origins and erasing the 2 centuries close to us, during which Gothic language was substantially reduced to a personal gift entrusted to a few Germanists accustomed to myths of Aryan man and little accustomed to scientific discipline.